What would you do if an archbishop told you you can't receive communion on the tongue? You have to receive it on the hand. And what if he gets up in front of the congregation during the liturgy and scolds you for it? That's what we're going to talk about today. I remember my own experiences where, in one particular case, I preferred to receive communion from a priest rather than an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion. Even though I've been one myself, still preferred to receive from a priest. Not that extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion are somehow inherently wrong, but I wanted to reinforce that the proper ministry of the priest was to dispense the Eucharist, and I wanted to reinforce that by this preference, a preference that, of course, the church allows for. I remember one time going up for communion, and the priest wouldn't give me communion, but directed me to the next line, the line to the right of me, where an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion was distributing the sacrament. So I went and received the Eucharist from her. Next week, went up to the priest to receive. Happened again. He directed me to my right, directed me to the extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, received communion from her again. Next week, did it again, happened a third time. And I thought, this is odd, because he's not doing that to anyone else. He's only doing that to me. So I asked him about it after Mass. I remember he started screaming at me in front of everyone. As everybody is walking out, started yelling at me and said, I am not allowed to receive communion for 6 months from him, that he's going to teach me a lesson I got to receive from the extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. Obviously, the priest was overstepping his bounds. The church does not permit him to do that. This is one of numerous cases of spiritual abuse that I've gone through, and I'm sure many of you have been through similar things at the hands of bad priests. Not all priests are this way, but many of them are spiritual abusers, if not abusers in other ways. Be that as it may, here this priest overstepped his bounds. And of course, I just ignored him and just went to a different parish and received from a different priest. In another case, I had my son, not long ago, in fact. Priest nitpicked him in the way he went up to receive communion. He's 6 years old, went up to receive communion, and maybe there was something that he did that wasn't to the priest's liking. And he started to get upset, like angry, visibly frustrated and angry at a 6-year-old trying to receive communion. And I'm thinking, that's odd, because all of these women dress like whores coming up here to receive communion with crop tops, with their breasts hanging out. He doesn't say a word to them, but says something about a sincere and genuine 6-year-old who just comes to receive the Eucharist. Same priest, by the way, who scolds parents whenever their children are crying during the liturgy. This was a traditionalist priest, by the way. Obviously overstepping his bounds. But this kind of spiritual abuse is all too common. All too common. And it's selective because, again, women dressed inappropriately get no rebuke. But people coming sincerely to receive the Eucharist with reverence are scolded for it. Which brings us to the point today. I'm about to show you a clip. I want to ask you, what would you do in this case if you saw this? If your archbishop did this to you? Do you feel that it was charitable? Do you feel that this is maybe overstepping one's bounds? I want to get your reaction first before I offer my own evaluation of it. So let me play the clip for you. It's pretty short. It's only 1 minute long. We're going to share my screen here. Here we go. This is Archbishop Bruno Forte. You may have heard of him from one of the synods back in 2014, where he insisted on including in the midterm relatio report language about how gays have plenty of, I forget the language, but talents and contributions to offer to the church. I recall hearing about him back then because it caused quite a stir and rubbed people in the wrong way, in the way in which it was done. I haven't really heard from him since, but I saw this one come up today. I don't know when this mass was. I don't know if it's recent or a while back, but I think there's certainly a learning moment here. Let's watch it together. Please let me know if there's any difficulty in hearing this video here. All right, let's begin.
Permettete che chiarisca un punto. Ci sono state 3 persone che non hanno voluto la comunione in mano. Allora, prima di tutto, nel Nuovo Testamento Gesù dice labete. Il verbo lambano in greco significa prendere in mano. Per secoli sempre la Chiesa ha preso in mano la comunione. Solo, in alcuni secoli oscuri, temendo la mancanza di igiene, si è sostituito questo gesto con quello del prenderla in bocca. Ma grazie a Dio oggi siamo tutti cresciuti, le mani ce le laviamo. Per cui la comunione si prende in mano, col gesto umile di stendere la mano e di accoglierla. Chi non lo fa un atto di orgoglio, si crede più saggio e più esperto del Papa e dei vescovi che hanno deciso che la comunione si prende in mano. Per piacere, siate umili e obbedienti alla Chiesa, almeno nel momento in cui fate la comunione e ricevete Gesù facendo la sua volontà, che è quella espressa nella Chiesa dal Papa e dai vescovi.
Okay, so let me read that to those of y'all who are just following along by audio alone. He says, and let me clarify one point. There were 3 people who did not want communion in their hands. So first of all, in the New Testament, Jesus says the fir tree, the verb lambano in Greek means to take in the hand. For centuries. Always the church has taken communion in hand, only in some dark centuries. Fearing lack of hygiene, replace this gesture with that of taking it in the mouth. But thank God today we are all grown up. The hands give it to us slowly. So communion is taken in the hand with a humble gesture of extending the hand and receiving it. Those who do not do an act of pride, he thinks he is wiser and more experienced than the Pope and the bishops who have decided that communion is taken in the hand. Please be humble and obedient to the church, at least when you take communion and receive Jesus doing his will, which is the will expressed in the church by the Pope and the bishops. So, okay. What would you do in this situation? What do you think about this? Do you think he's overstepping his bounds? We're going to consider that here in a moment, canonically, whether he's overstepping his bounds canonically and per the mandate of the magisterium. But you think this was handled right? You think this was the way to do it? You think this is something that even needed to be addressed during the liturgy? Like I actually had to make a word. Let me ask you a question. How many of the women who went up to receive communion during that liturgy had their breasts falling out of their shirt? Honest question. How many of them had tight jeans all on their body where you can completely see the figure of pretty much everything? How many of them? Let me ask you another question. How many people who went up to receive communion did not receive communion on the hand properly, but received it carelessly and probably walked away with your Eucharist, or received it on the hand, but not in a proper and reverent way on the hand, but rather in a way on the hand that was very careless. Might it be important to maybe address those things first? Does this not then come across as pharisaical? The group that gets scolded here in a nice way. I mean, he's not, he's not being as mean as he could be, but he's certainly scolding a group of people here, 3 communicants, calling them out, putting them on the spot. People know who they are. They saw them. They went up, and he's directly calling them out in a context where they can't speak for themselves and defend themselves. So using his ministry, using his authority to abuse these people spiritually. He did it in a relatively nice way, though, because you can spiritually abuse people in a gentle way. But it's still abuse nonetheless. But was that really priority here? Whatever criticisms that can be leveled against somebody who wants to receive communion on the tongue versus on the hand, if you want to offer some criticisms there, whatever criticisms they are, don't they pale in comparison to some of the other things that need to be addressed that probably went on during this Mass? That go on at Mass every single day? Every single day, every single Sunday, every single week. Might some of those things need to be addressed first? Why is it that this has to be targeted and this other kind of stuff, they don't get special announcements? I've never seen a priest get up and make a statement about how people don't need to walk away with the Eucharist. I have seen people walk away with the Eucharist. I have addressed them personally and told them they need to consume it. I have seen some priests go after the person and tell them, hey, you need to consume it. I have seen that, but I've never seen them get up and make a statement about it. I've never seen a priest get up and make a statement about people who are incredibly immodestly dressed. And I'm not being nitpicky here. I'm talking about outrageously immoral and inappropriate, showing their body parts. Trying to not be explicit here. I've never seen a priest address that. But I have seen multiple times priests and bishops scold people for receiving communion on the tongue or kneeling. Putting aside the question of did Jesus administer communion on the tongue or on the hand and what was the dominant practice of the first millennium, I've already done videos on that. We don't have to discuss that today because it's immaterial to what's going on here. Whether he's right or wrong, was this something that needed to be addressed? Is this kind of like the priority? Let's also see if we got our facts straight, shall we? Is he correct that the Pope and the bishops have determined you must receive on the hand and you ought not to receive communion on the tongue? And if you do so, you are guilty of pride and you're not humbly submitting to the magisterium. Is he correct about that? Well, let me show you what the magisterium and the Pope and the bishops say themselves. This is paragraph 92. Congregation for the Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments, Instruction Redemptionis Sacramentum. Scroll down to paragraph 92, and it says explicitly, although each of the faithful always has the right to receive Holy Communion on the tongue, there's a right here. There's a right. So when he said, wait, these people, they ought not to be doing this. They're not listening to the Pope and the bishops. Wait, excuse me. The Pope and the bishops said they have a right to do it. What are you talking about? Who are you as an individual bishop to overstep the bounds of the papal magisterium and the universal magisterium? Although each of the faithful always has the right to receive Holy Communion on the tongue at his choice, if any communicant should receive the sacrament in the hand in areas where the bishop's conference with the Recognitio of the Apostolic See has given permission, the sacred host is to be administered to him or her. So you have an option of doing either. You can receive by the hand or on the tongue, either way. You have a right to do either. It says, however, special care should be taken to ensure that the host is consumed by the communicant in the presence of the minister. Uh-oh! Well, that ain't being done in many cases. But I don't see any statements by bishops or priests about that one. So that no one goes away carrying the Eucharistic species in his hand. Ask a priest how many times they find Eucharistic hosts in the pages of hymnals in the pews at their parishes, and they'll be able to tell you it happens pretty often. If there is a risk of profanation, then Holy Communion should not be given in the hand to the faithful. How often does that happen? Not often, right? They very rarely will restrict it, even though it's being abused constantly, right? And I understand that abuse does not negate proper use. I totally get that. What I'm saying is, when it is abused, I've never really seen a bishop or priest say, well, we're going to stop doing this because it's being abused. Never seen that. Never seen that. Now, you'll notice there is a footnote here that refers you to the germ, the general instruction of the Roman Missal, paragraph 161, which states as follows. If communion is given only under the species of bread, the priest raises the host slightly and shows it to each, saying, the body of Christ. The communicant replies, amen, and receives the sacraments either on the tongue or, where this is allowed, and if the communicant so chooses, in the hand. You heard that? Either on the tongue or, if they choose, on the hand. The default is on the tongue, and then they have the option to do on the hand. As soon as the communicant receives the host, he or she consumes it entirely. If, however, communion is given under both kinds, the rite prescribed in Numbers 284 to 287 is followed. Anyways, you see, there's an option to do either. According to the magisterium, according to the Pope, according to the bishops, you have the right to do either. So when a single bishop comes along and says, you have to do one, and it's prideful to do the other, in fact, the one who's being prideful is the archbishop. The one who oversteps his bounds is the archbishop. The one who's not being obedient, ironically, is the archbishop, not the communicant. Say what you want about communion in favor of the hand versus on the tongue, whatever. Say what you want. You have to recognize the church allows for either. And it gives one the right to receive either way. And no individual archbishop can change that. The only exception being during a pandemic or some kind of massive crisis like a pandemic. Cardinal Sarah for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith did say that bishops can forbid people to receive communion on the tongue and require them to receive communion on the hand during times of pandemic. So during COVID, Cardinal Sarah said, yes, the bishop can tell you you have to receive on the hand only and cannot receive on the tongue. That's obviously during extraordinary circumstances, during the pandemic. Outside of that, what you have here in the germ and what you have here from the CDF, now DDF, actually wrong dicastery, from the Congregation for Divine Worship, now Dicastery for Divine Worship, stands, right? So what would you do in this case? Do you have a microphone where you can get up on your pulpit and start rebuking the archbishop? No, you don't have that. You don't have that opportunity. Unless you're a content creator like me who can say something, you likely won't get your say. But the archbishop can get up there, use his platform, and scold you, rebuke you, and do these kinds of things. That's called spiritual abuse. That's called spiritual abuse. That's what that is. I grant there are worse forms of abuse. Believe me, I understand that. But don't downplay this. This is wrong. This is wrong. No matter how nice one says it, no matter how nice one does it during their homily or sermon or whatever that was, it's still wrong. It's still abusive. and it still needs to be corrected. And the faithful, according to the document Dona Veritatis, and according to Canon 212, have the right to express their concerns publicly. In a constructive way, sure, but they have the right to say something. And so people have the right to address situations like this publicly. They can also, of course, address it directly with their priest. I'll tell you just from my experience, whenever you confront a priest, even in a very kind way, about some kind of mistake like this, it often doesn't go well. They often don't receive it well. There are exceptions. There are some good priests out there who would receive feedback very well. But just in my experience, many priests don't receive constructive criticism very well. When you have a priesthood, there is a potential for pride, clericalism, and abuse of power. That's what happens. So there's some potential for good. There's also some serious potential for abuse. And so it was very sad to come across this video. Again, I don't know if this was recently or a while back. Either way, this was wrong. But I was sad when I saw that. People were sharing it on Twitter. And I thought, how is it that this archbishop doesn't know what the magisterium itself says? It's like that time Supich said that Vatican II mandated versus populum. What? Yeah, no, it actually didn't. I mean, it's not even mandated today in the germ. It assumes ad orientem, and it does allow for versus populum in the germ, but certainly not mandated either by it or by Vatican II. What are they talking about? What kind of formation are these guys getting? It really makes you wonder, what are they learning in seminary? I don't know. I think it's fair to ask a question, though. So next time this happens, I think you might want to point out, well, you got this instruction, Redemptionis Sacramentum, and you got the germ itself that says that you can do either way. And so who is the priest? Who is the bishop to tell you you can't? It would be he who is overstepping his bounds. It would be he who does not have humility. It would be he who is guilty of pride at that point. And you can point that out in a kind and charitable way. You don't have to do so in a mean way, but you have the right to do that. So keep this in mind next time somebody tries to tell you, now you got to do one way or the other. Now in the Latin rite, no, you don't. You can choose to do either. Well, take a look at the chat and see what y'all got going on there. 12 Pillars, thank you so much for that super chat here. He says both are illicit, but by the way, First Communion by hand, John Chrysostom Baptismal Instruction 12:15-16. I've done multiple videos on the first millennium and the normative practice of how they received communion. Welcome to go and watch those. But regardless, the church today allows for either, so you don't get to say you have to do one as opposed to the other, or even accuse people of the sin of pride. Wow, that's abusive. To accuse people of pride like that when they're not being prideful. Maybe they're misinformed. Maybe they think that they have to receive communion on the tongue because that's the best way to do so, because they think that's the normative way in church history. Maybe there's some catechesis that's needed there. I don't think that this is something that warrants being scolded during a liturgy and being told you can't do this and you have to do by the hand. Zyra says, Michael, in Brazil, a bishop gave a speech about communion on the tongue and said it was a medieval practice, obviously saying that it has to stop. You should look it up. Regardless of the first time that we see the notion of communion on the tongue, how it originated, when it originated, why it originated, regardless, the point is the magisterium says you could do either. So I think that's the point that the archbishop isn't aware of. And That's a concern to me because you know what that's like. Isn't this material to his job, like critically so? I'm just saying, as a priest, as a bishop, you should kind of know what the communicant's rights are. So it's kind of material to your job description. It's like if I were a mechanic and I don't know how to change a tire, or I don't know how to change oil, or what? Huh? It's kind of relevant to your job description. What's going on? What do they teach you in seminary? I don't know. I don't know. See what else we got in the chat. Palermo says, well, many of the Irish bishops are de facto like the Anglicans in England and Scotland. Let's just call it for what it is. Leo says, I always receive communion on the tongue, kneeling every church I go to. Let's see what else we got. Irish says, if it was my bishop, I'd be emailing him with citations of canon law and magisterial documents. Been there, done that, and you will just get ignored in many cases. But that's not to say that you shouldn't do it, and that's not to say that all bishops would ignore you, but that is to say many will. And that doesn't relieve you of your duties to do so, by the way. Just telling you like it is so you can be ready to be prepared to face reality. Ramsey says, I want to ask everyone for prayers for my grandma, who seems to be in her last days, and prayers for my family, especially my dad, who has taken this very hard. I'm so sorry to hear that. Absolutely. We'll certainly keep them in prayer. Victoria says, this is why I waited so long to join the church. I'm not one to take things this lightly. Fair enough. I get it. Irish says, my parish priest still gave on the tongue. We were just asked to wait until everyone else received. That's also fair. Chris says, I've done it both ways, depending on what church I'm at. I think it's important to not be dogmatic about either way. I think that's what's important. But the big takeaway here was people are being accused of pride and called out during a mass, and it's just factually not true what was being said. One commenter says Archbishop Bruno is in grave error. Popes St. Paul VI and John Paul II both said priests cannot deny the faithful communion on the tongue. Yeah, regardless of just what the Pope said, their magisterium itself here in this instruction from the CDF says that people have the right to receive either way. And of course, this was approved by the Pope. This was approved by John Paul II, 2004. So this would be approved in common form, so it participates in the Pope's ordinary magisterium. What would you do if this happened to you? Would you go to another parish? That's a great question. Great question. Of course, I think that you have a duty to correct the Archbishop in a constructive and respectful way. I think you have that duty. But just be prepared for likely not the response that you would hope for. Have I done a video on Constantinople 869 to 870 and 879 to 880? Yeah, several videos. How do Catholics say Gregory VII overstepped his authority, and the latter should be Constantinople IV? I do write about that in my book, Answering Orthodoxy, if you want to read a little bit more about it. I think I grabbed everything here. Just double checking. Well, I do a video on baptism soon. I recently heard a traditional Catholic say that baptism on the hair is invalid. Right, it does have to make contact with the person, not just their hair, from what I've seen. and I'm aware of the video referring to. My bigger concern here is, although in that video, if you play the rest of it, they do end up making contact with the person's actual body and head, and so they don't show you like the full video. They show you just in the name of the Father and of the Son, and then they cut it there. In the Holy Spirit, the next part, they made it a valid baptism after that. But my thing is, how incompetent can you be that you have such a difficulty actually making contact with the water and the person? This is not the first time I've seen this. It happened to my first son. It's like, how incompetent can you be? I don't understand. It's like, how is this really that hard? You put water on the person. I don't get it. It's like a mechanic, again, going to change the oil, I guess with a wrench is what they would use for that. I don't know. They pick up the wrench. What is the wrench? I don't know what this is. Where do I put this? Do I put this in the refrigerator? Do I put it in the crisper? Maybe I'll use this to open a Coke bottle. What? That's what it's like. It's like, how miserably incompetent can you be for just something so simple? I don't understand that. I don't get that. And I'm not trying to be overly critical here, because I know a lot of priests have a really tough job, and my heart goes out to them. And I know they got a lot of duties, but it's like, it's not hard to make contact between water and the person's body. I don't know. I'm just saying. I've baptized many people. It isn't hard. I've done it in different modes. And I can tell you, again, not hard. I don't get it. Anyways. Long story short, I'm aware of the video you're referring to. Do be aware that people will take clips like that and not show you the whole thing. Even in that case, though, it's kind of like, what was going on here anyway? But even though that clip was edited, I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes they don't get it right. And I don't, for the life of me, I don't understand how so hard. It's so hard to, I guess, say the black, do the red. Anyways. All right. That's going to do it for today. Y'all hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure to also check me out, patreon.com/Reason of Theology, if you want to get access to extra material and support this channel. If you also appreciated this video, share it with your friends on social media. But you also need to hit the like button. You need to hit the subscribe button, and also hit the bell for notifications so you know when I go live. Because a lot of people, they're subscribed, but they tell me all the time, I don't know when you go live. Hit the bell for notification. God bless.